everyone. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. We're going to speak about today the state licensure pathway as an alternative or as a stepping stone to obtain the RD credential. This is a topic that not a lot of people spoke about when I was going to school, and I think it's very important, especially important in light of the 2024 changes that are coming to the nutrition education system as a whole. And it's also a path that I personally went down, which I will speak about a little bit later. And for me, having this state licensure option meant the difference between not being able to earn money with my nutrition degree versus earning money and having a successful business. So let me tell you a little bit about that. So just before we get started, a little bit about me. I am a registered dietitian and I have a master's degree in nutrition. I am also a licensed New York State attorney. I own a private practice and we're currently 15 dietitians across state lines. We're now in 3 states. I am a former professor and guest lecturer, spoke at a lot of internships in colleges, and I love doing that. And I'm also a proud wife and mom, happily married with 2 little girls. So let's first talk a little bit about what's needed for the registered dietitian credential. I'm going to speak about the registered dietitian credential pre-2024 when the changes are coming. And then, of course, I'll address the master's requirement in a little bit. So there's 3 components to become a registered dietitian if you're in a DPD program, a didactic program in dietetics. And that's different from a coordinated program. A coordinated program, you're doing the education and the experience joint. The DPD, you're doing the education first. That's most programs in nutrition right now. You're doing the education first, then you're going to a dietetic internship, and then you're taking the RD exam. So there's 3 components that you need in order to finish up and become a registered dietitian. There's going through the undergraduate schooling, that's known as the didactic program in dietetics or DPD. And when you successfully complete them, based on your college's requirement, you will earn what is termed a DPD verification statement. And that enables you to go on to an Ascend accredited supervised program. And after you do the Ascend accredited supervised program, you become what is known as RD eligible to sit for the RD exam. And then hopefully you pass, and then you become a registered dietitian. Notice I highlighted the second component, the Ascend accredited supervised program, because that's one of the areas that state licensure differs from the RD credential in terms of process, in terms of how you obtain it. So I want to talk about a couple of roadblocks that students often experience, which prevents them from finishing up the RD. And historically, actually, there have been a lot of leftovers, so to say, of the RD system. People that have started going for a degree in nutrition and for whatever reason did not finish up becoming a registered dietitian. So one is graduating with a degree, either a bachelor's or a master's in nutrition, but without a DPD verification statement. The second is not getting matched. So historically, we've had too few internships for students that were interested in the internship options. Consequently, there were many students that did not get matched. And without having an Ascend accredited internship, well, can't become an RD. And the third, a very big one, especially this has recently been brought to light, is not having the means to forfeit a full year of work and pay up to $20,000 for an internship. And I'm going to say 2 things about that. First of all, it recently came to light that there are a lot of minority groups that have been underrepresented in nutrition due to the significant cost. And on the topic of the cost, you have to realize doing the internship is not just the tuition sum you're paying to the internship. There is something, the business concept called opportunity cost. And opportunity cost means if you're pursuing one thing, you can't be doing something else in order to get that opportunity. So if you're doing a dietetic internship for a full year, you can't be working for a full year. And that means you're effectively forfeiting a full year of work. That's the opportunity cost of doing the dietetic internship, which is huge because with a nutrition degree, a little bit of willpower, you could pretty easily be earning a nice amount of money during that year, which you're not doing because you're pursuing the dietetic internship if you're doing that. So I want to focus a little bit on the not getting matched component. And I'm going to take you through a few statistics. So I'm going to start with some matching statistics. These are the number of applicants that were applying for dietetic internships, and then the number of students that actually matched to a dietetic internship. I have statistics here from 2016 to 2019, and things have gotten a little better since 2019, but not significantly. So as you can see, every year, there's a considerable number of students not getting matched. Now you might think, well, a 70% match rate is really good, but that means that, look around your class, roughly 1 out of every 3 students are not getting matched to dietetic internships. And bear in mind, this number doesn't account for, meaning if you think this number will account for, well, this is how many students that are starting are actually not finishing the RD. That's not a true representation, because for every student that goes through the matching process, there's probably another student out there that doesn't even try, can't even afford it, or is not eligible because they didn't earn a DPD verification statement. So, you know, or getting a degree that's not the DPD sequence, that's a nutrition or health related degree. And these students can't even apply for the dietetic internship. So there's a huge number of students out there that are not pursuing dietetic internships. And I know it's interesting to talk about statistics, but what does that mean in numbers, right? About 2,000 students a year, and that's the students that are eligible to go for a DI program, finish the DPD sequence with the verification statement, are not matched through this process. And without doing a dietetic internship and getting into one and actually following it through, you cannot become an RD. There's no workaround. And that is true even after 2024, unless you go into a future education program. But we'll hold that thought for now. And the truth is, you know, at least when I went to school, I'll tell you what happened when I went to school. My first class in nutrition, we had a book, and at the end of the first chapter, there was a large conversation about, you know, how RDs are the only qualified professional and everybody else was a quack. And that was all nice and dandy. And when I was in school, I believed it. And I said, yeah, you know, I'm going to be this RD. I'm definitely, it's for me. The path is for me. And I'm going to be the competent practitioner out there. And there's so many other people that shouldn't have nutrition credentials. And that was all fine and dandy until I was one of the quacks, until I was one of the people that had a degree. And it would have been such a long and burdensome process to become an RD that I decided to practice without the credential, which was legal. It's still legal in New York. And, you know, and that's what made me think, why? And I guess also law school kind of makes you think, and that was all happening at the same time for me. Why should my colleagues, those with degrees, or your colleagues that are coming to the future, why should they not be able to practice in the field that they went to school for, legitimately went to school for? They're competent. They sat through the same classes as you did. Why shouldn't those students be able to practice the craft that they got a degree in? And, you know, the whole academy push for licensure, let's go get licensed. That's going to be a great thing for dietitians. You know, it kind of made me think, wait, is that such a great thing? Because we're blocking out our own colleagues here, right? We're blocking out people that went to school for us. If states were truly strictly licensed and there was no other way to obtain a license unless you were an RD. And the second, I think the second big component is that, you know, licensure costs RDs a lot of money. So even if you're an RD and another state obtains licensure, now with telehealth, if you want to practice across state lines, you may have to obtain a license in the other state. And that's an initial application fee, yearly renewal fees, a whole host of fees. And it costs us more money to be practicing across state lines. And the truth is, in most states, you don't need an RD to practice. And to take insurances, even to take Medicare insurance, most states you don't need an RD. There's always a workaround. And there's a great alternative that I'm going to talk about in a little bit more depth that I want you to be aware of, because I don't want you to throw your career away if the full path to finish the RD doesn't work out for you. And that path is state licensure or certification. And as I just mentioned, it shouldn't be RD or bust. You can have a great career, a lucrative career, even without that RD credential. So let's delve right into it. Let's talk a little bit about the state licensure, or in some states, it's state certification alternative that I'm going to be advocating for today. And that is, first point, very important point, it's not available in every state. It's available in 20 states to go the RD route to go the state licensure route without first obtaining your RD. You can do this separately from the RD. So even if you're not an RD, and you didn't get an internship, you can still become state licensed. This is a misconception held by many RDs. Many RDs think you need the RD to get state licensed. Well, that's because they've just done it that way. They first became an RD and then got state licensed, but the truth is you don't need it. There's usually a workaround. A DPD verification statement is not necessarily required. It's on the state. And that's another important point. When you are obtaining and seeking state licensure, you really got to go by the rules of the specific state you're seeking licensure in, because they differ. Every state is different. And, and even though this is available in 20 states, and you might have one state in mind, you want to also be cognizant of the other states' rules, because if you ever want to move, you are going to have to meet those requirements if you're not an RD already. But I'm getting into the weeds a little bit too much here. Let's just talk about this alternative a little bit more. So as I mentioned, the DPD is not necessarily required. So it's an avenue for those who, for example, did a master's in nutrition. Didn't have the undergraduate. Still, you can do the state licensure route. You didn't take all the undergraduate coursework for the DPD verification statement. You can probably still get state licensure, which is great. The hours requirement's a little bit more flexible. So you still need supervised practice. You still need supervised hours. However, there's no match process. It's a little bit more flexible. You can have a job while you're doing the hours. The pathway could be shorter. Some states only require 800 hours as opposed to the 1,000 to 1,200 that the Ascend accredited programs require. And it's a state licensure is a recognized credential for many jobs and for private practice. So you can become a private practice dietitian, even taking insurance. You can get many jobs with a state licensed credential. And 20 states have the option, with many states recognizing another state's licensure. We touched on this a little bit before, but if, say, for example, you're doing this in New York, just to give a little bit of background, New York allows you to do all 800 hours at one site. Whereas if you look at Florida law, you got to do 200 hours of clinical, 200 hours of community. They break it down for you. So even though you might be seeking this in New York, right, you have to also be cognizant, well, if I want to relocate to Florida, I'm going to have to meet those requirements as well. Might want to just break it up a little bit and make sure to sort of check every box. But you really have to know the first state you're seeking licensure in, down the line if you're transferring, not transferring, but if you have to apply for another license, what those requirements are in order to make sure you're satisfying them so that you won't have to go through yet another step to become licensed in that other state. Now, what's required for state licensure? So you need and this is like pretty much across the board, you need a bachelor's or higher in nutrition with certain coursework met. It differs by the state. Remember, when you're seeking state licensure or certification, you're in a bubble. You have to work with the bubble of that state's laws. 800 to 1,000 hours of supervised experience under a dietitian. The 800 to 1,000 will vary depending on which state you're looking at. And you have to take the RD exam, or sometimes there's an alternative exam allowed, which you can do even if you don't finish the DI program. Many people think that in order to even sit for the RD exam, you have to first do the dietetic internship, and then you become what's termed RD eligible, and then you can sit for the exam. That's true in the RD world. However, there is a little bit of a workaround. If you're just taking the RD exam for state licensure, you can actually do it even if you didn't get into a DI or ever pursue one. You can sit for the RD exam. Should you pass it, you're not an RD. Very important to get clear. You're a state licensed dietitian, or in some states, a state certified dietitian where there's certification law. But that shouldn't be holding you back. And what that means is many state licensed dietitians have taken and passed the same exam that RDs do. They pretty much meet this similar requirements. However, there's not that Ascend accredited supervised practice or the DPD verification statement that you have to worry about. So what are some of the advantages of getting state licensure? I think the biggest now is that 2024 is coming. And if you're not finishing up by the deadline, post 2024, no state has raised the requirement to a master's. There's no master's required. So you can go straight from a DPD to supervised practice to state license without getting a master's. Huge cost savings, huge time savings as well. And you can also just use it as a springboard and then get your master's later. it makes you fully employable as a dietitian nutritionist in the state that you are licensed. You're in that particular state where you're a licensed dietitian, you're pretty much on equal footing as registered dietitians in terms of what you can and cannot do. Now, with that being said, there are some hiring managers that may kind of want the RD credential still, for example, maybe in some hospital settings, maybe in some nursing home settings, but there are many jobs, if you're flexible enough, that a state licensed dietitian is more than sufficient in terms of credentials. You can do private practice taking insurance. You can take and pass the RD exam early, even before you get the master's, even post 2024. And should you eventually finish up the requirements after you are state licensed and took the RD exam, you can become an RD within the next 5 years. You can finish up without retaking that exam. That exam is good for 5 years. So if you finish up the requirements within the next 5 years, you become an RD. You don't have to sit through that exam again. And lastly, for many internships, you can actually get some of the hours you completed for state licensure accepted as prior assessed learning hours, as PAL hours they're called. So it saves you some time. Let's talk a little bit about the disadvantages of getting state licensure. And I'm going to say this, the disadvantages are disadvantages versus getting the RD. Obviously, if you're deciding between not using your degree that you have, your degree in nutrition, and getting state licensed, it's a no-brainer that getting a state license is a good idea. But I'm talking about that versus the RD credential. So state licensure is not as universally recognized. Remember, it's a state matter, so it's good for the state. And it may or may not be accepted going from state to state, as well as going from the state to other countries. For example, the country of Israel. That's just one I know off the top of my head. If you are an RD in the States and you want to get a license in the country of Israel, if you're an RD, you don't have to take their exam. If you're not an RD, and if you're a state licensed dietitian, you're not an RD, you may have to go through more, I guess, hoops, you could say, right? Might have taken their exam, etc. It's not earth-shattering. It's just, it's not as mobile. You can't take it anywhere you want to go. But it could serve you in your career. For the rest of your career, you may remain in one state, and that'll be good enough. Some hospital jobs and clinical jobs require the RD credential, either because their hiring manager wants it or because somebody on the board wants it. So you may be a little bit more limited in terms of options. It's very hard to pursue this on your own. And I think that's a very big deal, because when you're in a dietetic internship program, a lot of the requirements are handled, at least. You might have to be like finding your own preceptors, but a lot of the hurdles are managed by a company that you're paying, or sometimes a school that you're paying. You're in a program, you're in a structured setting that's actually kind of making sure you go along with the process. And if you're doing state licensure, you're all on your own. You have to be the one to set up your own program, find the preceptors, study for the exam, make sure that everything is happening in order to obtain this, and also file with the state, which can be very bureaucratic. So, and also you might be saying, well, if I do this, quasi dietetic internship thing on my own, at the end, might there be some gaps missing? Like, what if I don't know how to practice? Yikes. And I mean, I guess the last disadvantage, and I'm mentioning this from personal experience, is some RDs may be hostile to the fact that you exist and you're practicing. I don't know what it is. There just seems to be a kind of feeling, perhaps, at least toward me, it felt this way, of where RDs were superior, and kind of, it's not fair that you're practicing and being successful without the way, we suffered through the internship. How do you get away with it? It's not fair. Obviously it's unfounded. Everybody has this option. But it's just, you may get pushback from RDs. That's just something that I encountered. I hope that attitude is starting to change, of this like RDs only elite club. But at the end of the day, there's a shortage of dietitians. We need more of us helping America. America needs help with their diets, and there's definitely room for everybody. So, with the disadvantages being said, I think this is a good plan B. I don't know and everybody knows their own circumstances. right? You might have $1 million to your name. You might have $10 to your name. I don't know. I don't know your finances. I don't know your situation. I don't know your ambition level. But I think this is a good plan B to know about the state licensure pathway, because why should you have to throw a good career away? But let's talk about the number of students that are pursuing this. So in 2019, there were over 1,700 students unmatched. I took that from the previous slide where I showed you the unmatched statistics. And if you look at these numbers with me, right, these are the matching statistics that we spoke about a little earlier. And these are the number of state students that sat for the RD exam as a state licensure candidate. So students that are RD eligible, not even RD eligible, but students that are coming from RD programs that have made it all the way through. If you look at these numbers, it's staggering. 2016, just to compare numbers, we had, number of applicants unmatched, was like 4,000 here, 3,000, and the number of students that did this was 33. Was 29. 2017, 39 students did this. 2018, 38. 2019, this is actually year to date when I got those numbers. 24 students had done this. And that's a very, very low percentage. Less than 2% of students that could be doing this which did not. And bear in mind, that's only counting those that, were eligible for matching, right? If you count like the number of students with an MS degree in nutrition that don't do this, it's just wild. There's so few students doing this. And I had to ask myself why. And in that, I kind of learned one major reason why students don't do this is a lack of awareness. So many students, especially when I went to school, didn't know the option existed. I certainly didn't know the option existed. And in fact, when I asked my advisor about this, she told me like, yeah, you can't do it without the RD. Maybe the law is written right, you can't do it. And then I said, well, in life, we can only try. I'm going to try. And it's complicating to navigate on your own. Many people don't want to do it on their own. They're nervous, they're scared. There's difficulty in finding preceptors. You need connections. You need to know people that are willing to take you in, because even DI students have a difficult time finding preceptors. And there's difficulty in meeting the requirements on your own. Different state laws vary, and not always do you get straight answers if you query the state board. And finally, there's how do I practice as a dietitian after that, and those concerns, right? In some states, you need continuing education. How do I keep track of those? What do I do? And finally, there's the fear of if students go this route, they're not going to be trained fully as a dietitian. And that's what I decided to start and do. I run a program. It's called Dietitian in Training. I try to bridge the gap of why more students aren't doing this, because I believe more students should be going this route. So I offer a program which is cheaper than a traditional dietetic internship, helps you navigate the process of state licensure fully. So we actually find and set up preceptors for you. We help train you in dietetics practice, teaching you some of the same skills as your DI peers. We're not meeting every one of the Ascend accredited requirements because we're not an Ascend accredited program. We don't finish with the RD, right? We're not training students to be becoming RDs. We're training them for state licensure and those requirements, which are different depending on the state you do it. And finally, we offer guidance and support. That's where my advocacy comes in. Sometimes you do need to get involved with the state if they're being really hard. And I try to, if something needs to be fought, we fight it. So like, for example, if they're not honoring what the law says and they should be, that's where I would come in. And the legal background certainly helps. So what about after your state license? What can you do with that? You can get employed, many settings, and you can open up your own private practice. We give training on how. That's my specialty. That's what I do. That's what I do besides this. But I opened a private practice. I love doing every minute of private practice, and I'm very blessed with that. They say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And thank God it's been that way since I opened the private practice, even though I now work in a different capacity a little bit because I also manage, it's definitely rewarding work. And I know a lot of students want to go into that, and they should. And that's something that I can happily train in the program because I've done it firsthand experience. Of course, after your state license, you can go back and finish the RD. right? That choice is yours. You have that option if you want to use this as a stepping stone to the RD or as a replacement. That's your choice. I'm just going to talk a little bit about other options you can do for if you're a non-RD, which is just good to know about, really good to know about. So let's talk about what the Academy encourages you to do with a bachelor's degree in nutrition. They encourage you to become a DTR, which you can do. You just take an exam, DTR exam after a bachelor's, and you are a DTR. That versus state licensure is almost a no-brainer because maybe you have to do a couple more hours, but at the end of the process, you're a state licensed full dietitian. You're not a diet tech. So your options are much more open, salaries are much higher as a state licensed dietitian. You can also just get a real job and start gaining real experience. Many jobs don't require the RDs. They just require a degree in nutrition, like a WIC job. Usually it's just a degree in nutrition. And you can start gaining real experience, at least until you know your next steps, which is powerful, very powerful. Maybe you have to search with a little bit of a wider eye on the job market. Maybe put in health in the job title and become like a health safety inspector. But there's so much to do in culinary nutrition and sports nutrition. Some of it doesn't require an RD. You can open up a private practice, even without state licensure in some states. Many states are unlicensed. You can start opening up a private practice. I wouldn't misrepresent my credentials. If anyone asks, you have a degree in nutrition, which you do, right? If you've gone through school, you do. And, just be transparent. Nutritionist, degreed nutritionist, you can definitely practice as a private practice person and earn a living that way. You can also do nutrition writing as well as nutrition teaching. Nutrition teaching is, whether at the collegiate level, if you have a master's, or at the high school level, it's also an option. So a little bit about my background and why I started my program, which I touched on a little bit maybe earlier, but I'll just say it again. So I didn't become an RD right away because I had my undergraduate was in biology. I had gone to a religious school. My parents insisted that I actually go to a religious school for religious purposes. And I went to Toro College and they didn't offer nutrition. So I got a degree in biology. And then I learned, as many people from, I guess you could say, my generation a couple of years ago, as many people learned, you have to either pre-2024 and pre-future education, which is coming out now, I had to either pursue a second bachelor's in nutrition and take like 72 credits, or get to go for a master's in nutrition was a very simple transition. I just had to take a couple of classes, and that was the obvious choice for me. And I got my master's in nutrition, which I thought would be great. But I didn't realize that even with a master's in nutrition, the road to the RD would have been really long. And I then found out about the CDN option, found out about that through reading a bunch of stuff that I found on the internet. And I decided, you know what, it's a credential, let's go for it, let's see where it leads. And I discovered the possibility of getting state certification. Back then I was in New York, and I went ahead and did it. And I navigated and struggled because it was difficult. It was a difficult road for me. And, sometimes in life you ask yourself, like, why? Why couldn't I just be normal? Why couldn't I just go into a nutrition program, undergraduate, be done, go into a dietetic internship? Like, why do I have to go through all these hurdles? Why do I have to struggle to find a preceptor, and take the RD exam all on my own without peers, without anything, without any support, without any hand-holding, learning private practice on my own? Sometimes you wonder why, right? We all go through that. And it's kind of nice to see in hindsight. Hindsight is always 20/20. Why did I have to do this? Of course I know why, right? I had to help others. And I navigated, but I learned. And when you struggle, you learn. And since I became a state licensed dietitian, I opened up the doors for others who were asking me for help, and I was able to help them. And as more students were reaching out to me for assistance, I realized it's time to start something a little formal. And that is how Dietitian in Training was born. So we're still pretty new, but we're growing, and definitely very excited to be helping students do this and use their degree to the extent that they can, even if they're not an RD. So if you have more questions on this lecture, feel free to reach out to me. My email, dietitiantraining@gmail.com, or you can see more at my website, dietitianintraining.com. Have a great day.